Hello and welcome. I'm Sierra Santana with La Leaf, and I just want to welcome everyone to the 20th edition of La Leaf, the Los Angeles Latino International Film Festival. After an incredibly challenging year for everyone in every area, we're so excited to be back with this hybrid festival of virtual and in-person screenings with an amazing offering of films, music, art, and so much more. Before we begin, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. We are on Los Angeles and we are on Tongva land. We could just take a moment and just honor where we are. Great. So I'm so excited to be here today with two incredible artists and cultural strategists, Favianna Rodriguez and Layel Camargo of the Center for Cultural Power. Favi is the co-founder and president of the Center for Cultural Power. She's an award-winning artist, cultural strategist, social movement leader. Favi just does everything and works in every arena, everything from economic inequality, gender justice, climate change, sex positivity. She leads cultural strategy. Favi just does it all, a Renaissance woman. And Layel, I'm so excited to meet you. Layel is a cultural strategist, a land steward, a filmmaker, and an artist. And Layel is the impact producer for the North Pole Show season with executive producer Rosario Dawson. Layel, I'm actually so excited to learn more about you. I've seen you around, so yeah, I'm just excited to know you. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Favianna Rodriguez, and I am an artist, activist, and the president at the Center for Cultural Power. Really excited to be joining you today.
Thanks for that introduction, Sarah. Layel Camargo here, Ecological Arts and Culture Manager at the Center for Cultural Power. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm calling in from Wiccan territory of Ohlone people's lands. Favi, what pronouns do you use and where are you calling in from?
I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from Ohlone territory, also known as Oakland, California.
So we're going to be speaking a little bit about these two works that we worked on, which is a Germ Pod series, and then also kind of cultural signifier that Favianna and I created called Climate Wolf that now has this like so many meanings behind it. But I was curious if we could just start off by talking about just how did we create Germ Pod, Favi? I feel like that was like a whole thing when we're thinking about, oh my God, we're in a pandemic. How do we have relationships?
Yeah, one thing that was really powerful during the pandemic, at least for me, and I think a lot of people experienced this, is that the pandemic really required us to think about our support networks. To think about our support networks and how it is that we can get through one of the most challenging hardships in our human existence, because let's remember, it wasn't just the pandemic, it was the way in which our governments were failing to respond to our needs. It was definitely a very racialized crisis and a gender crisis, just because we saw who were the most affected. And the failures of capitalism really revealed that we didn't have adequate ways to deal with our mental health and to deal with what it means to be spatially separated. And as somebody who was living by myself, I know, Layel, you were living by yourself at the time, we needed to explore ways to negotiate and find, like a container of connection that would allow us to support each other. I mean, I think deep emotional connection and support is just as important as mutual aid. And what we know from other communities who have been impacted, such as the disability community, is that we need to be very intentional about developing networks and systems of support. And because we are interconnected species, and although capitalism makes us believe that we can be individualists, when a lot of things are taken away from us, like our ability to socialize, our ability to go to our favorite places, it really requires us to tap in to what's important and how we have created structures to support us during crisis. And so Layel and I were in an ongoing conversation about that. And, you know, as I'm a polyamorous person. I'm a person that was, you know, self-partnered during the pandemic. And so navigating all the complexities of what the pandemic meant was a lot. And I'm so grateful that I was able to be have those conversations with Layel, who, you know, Layel, what I love about the way you roll is that you are very informed by many different kinds of experience, many different kinds of movements. And so I feel like it was really around capturing that and documenting that.
Yeah, thanks for laying that all out, Favi. I remember we were sitting in LA and I had just come down to like spend a couple of weeks with you, because something I realized during the pandemic was we had to like come together very intentionally. So I couldn't just be like, hey, I'm gonna come visit you for the weekend, then I'm gonna stay here, and then I'm gonna, you know, hang out with my cousin. Like, it was like, if I was coming to see you, which at the time I was coming to LA, like I had to like, okay, I'm gonna stay for this many days, like I'm gonna get tested 3 or 4 days before I come. Like, our life really slowed down because of how cautious we needed to be, which for us came inherent because of our polyamorous identities and our polyamorous experiences, that consent communication was already a muscle we had been able to build. So it became less isolating to do that. We're sitting around this beautiful house in a studio where Favianna had a cooking residency, and we were like talking about how we needed to just share how we had even come together. And I was like, what if we just like build off of this word called germ pod? And I had heard of pod when I organized in transformative justice, just to build your pods for when you respond to conflict and harm. And I was like, let's do germ pods. Like, I've been hearing this word that people are potting up, so like, let's riff off of it. And we were just like, let's give folks some tips on how we did it. And then our organization was like, y'all, this was dope. Like, well, let's make this into a regular series. And we were thinking of like, what do we want to show in this video series? And a lot of it was how to maintain relationships. But it's such a radical act to talk about communication during a global pandemic and the necessity of it, that it just became so evident that we needed to be more out there on relationships. And to me, why this became very central is, as a climate activist, as somebody who cares about the environment and the planet, is one of the people that I look up to, which her name is Vandana Shiva. She said the biggest impacts that COVID's going to have is the ability of us to reconvene together as an interwoven, interconnected species, which capitalism will take advantage of that because of the individualism that is being promoted through COVID, through us being separated. So I kind of jumped on board to this and was really excited to continue creating content around it, because I wanted people to see people socializing still, as a way for us to continue building this world that we're all going to need to survive. So I'm really happy that you were like my co-collaborator and you were my pod mate, Favi. Like, I feel like one of my highlights of things that we did together routinely was we started going to the farmer's market on Saturday and having dim sum pretty regularly as like a way to do that. And I like that we build a routine. And I think a lot of people were doing that too. I suspect. I don't know if you felt the same, that people were like building some routines because of the pandemic.
Yes, Layel, I'm really glad you asked that, because the pandemic was also an opportunity for us to shed relationships and practices that were no longer serving us or being regenerative in our lives. And for me, the farmers market, because it was an outdoor space, was an opportunity, one, to eat and get our food, right? Because at the time, it was harder to go into supermarkets. The lines at the supermarkets were really long. And of course, we can live out our values. You know, Layel and I are both vegan, we're plant-based. We support local farmers. And we wanted opportunities to connect over the things we need to do together to support our existence, right? And whether that means, you know, taking walks together, being out in nature together, buying food together, it meant implementing new practices that allowed us to be resilient. And what I, you know, just speaking for a second about friendships, because I've seen a lot of this around social media, is that the pandemic also showed us the need for us to be invested in friendships that are reciprocal. And what I realized as, I'm a leader, I'm a Latina that's been raised to be a hyper caregiver, is that sometimes I've been caregiving a lot without a reciprocal way of being reinvested in. And during the pandemic, my ability to do that just was not the same. And I allowed for some friendships to wither out, and I put my focus on the friendships that were truly being reciprocal. And so germ potting isn't just about, who you gather with. It's about also thinking intentionally, what are the skills in our pod that will allow us to remain resilient, to support each other? Have we established practices and norms that are about reciprocity, right? And even I remember when I got my first hug from Layel, which was in May after my dog died, I had not gotten a hug since March 7th. So it had been over 2 months of not getting physical contact from my friends. And so all of that negotiation and all of that was very core to being able to emerge from the pandemic, knowing that, oh, wow, now I'm going to do my friendships in a different way. I'm actually going to really look for people who value reciprocity, who also know how to communicate, right? Because I mean, our mental health, and it continues to be challenging, but the mental health impacts of the pandemic are significant. So yeah, just developing those new habits was that we still do was very life-giving.
Yeah, and I think the reason why we decided to document it is because we weren't noticing a lot of people getting visibility on it. So I think also Favianna is like a movement leader, like you speaking out on it is really important, and for people to see you in collaborative relationships with other people was part of what we were trying to shed light on as well. Favianna and I have been go for it.
I want to add something to that, which is that this is our work as artists. Our work as artists is to show and model a different way, right? And it's important because we might be doing stuff, but the moment we're able to create a video and to put that out into social media, that creates a learning tool for other people. And this is why art and culture is powerful. This is why we need film. It's also why we need stories, why we need people to share their stories. It's why it's so important for everyone to even talk about how they're getting vaccinated. Because as we move through this pandemic and we adopt different kinds of behaviors, it's so important to share those behaviors back out and inspire people to do the same. And so I remember when we first shared the video, we got so much positive feedback because people were working out their agreements, or they weren't talking about it. And so we helped inspire people's habits. And I that is exactly the power of being a culture maker.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up for Favi, because I think what this makes me think about is just the intentionality that just went into us creating GermPod that was kind of inherent because we are cultural workers and we're aware that like we're shifting culture when we do things. So even when we're talking about like consent and communication, like it was like, oh, this is inherent to us. And we're like, wait, other people aren't doing this. Okay, this is an opportunity, like a talking point we want to share. And I wanted to bring up how our process for even creating Climate Woke as a cultural signifier was something like that. Was you felt really passionate about climate change. I was just emerging myself as an artist and as a cultural worker at the time. And we kind of were like, this is an area where we're not seeing a lot of Black, Indigenous people of color. A lot has changed since that, but this is like 2016, 2015, where a lot of climate conversations were still being dominated by white men, specifically white grass top nonprofits that were focused on the environment, specifically carbon marketing. Well, now we understand it is evolving to carbon marketing. A lot of stuff that like Black, Indigenous people of color don't really think about on the day-to-day because we're so bogged down by classism and racism, and that's assuming none of us are in other struggles. And so it became like a big passion of mine. At the time, I was really excited about merging gender and climate. So I kind of came into our relationship and your excitement around climate activation, like thinking through the climate crisis. as like, has to be an intersectional dialogue. And you were fortunate enough to offer me and Jesus like 6 months of just going out and meeting people and hearing, and I was so grateful for that. And because of that, we created Climate Woke. Like we were like, what's missing is language. How do we have language that is appealing to people who are between the ages of 15 to 35, who look and think like us, who might be excited about some kind of progressive political social movement, but isn't necessarily plugged into it, or who are at the front lines and wouldn't even know to call it anything and need more language for advocates to kind of help give them a platform. And it was in 2018, the Global Climate Action Summit was going to happen.
That's right.
And we sat down for many brainstorm sessions with funders, with PR firms, with movement and grassroots organizations. And we were like, what are we actually doing? But we need this Global Climate Action Summit to have this representation of folks who are much younger, who represent BIPOC communities. And Climate Woke came out at the time where you were like, this is something that's like derived from Black vernacular. Let's check in with BLM movement leaders. And within like 10 hours, you had created this beautiful logo that we still use for our content.
Yes.
And so I think what folks at La Leaf are going to have access to is the Amazon Prime Video, which is our latest release of content.
Yes.
But Climate Woke became a campaign from just us wanting to give folks a platform to use to amplify their stories. And now we convene artists, we convene movement groups, we create content. We're actually working on some RFPs to help artists be able to create some more content using the logo. And we're also thinking about what themes are we amplifying this year. And so I feel like I don't even know that we knew what we were making till now. And I'm curious, like now that we're here, looking at all the content that we've created, how do you feel, Favi, that we've done?
Well, I think, you know, I know that there's a lot of creatives in this gathering and a lot of filmmakers. I think it's important, one, to also trust when you see a gap in the content and information around you. And so as an environmentalist, Layel and I are both environmentalists, I was like, okay, it's always Leonardo DiCaprio, it's Mark Ruffalo, and yet I grew up in a highly polluted community right next to the freeway. And where are our stories? And we can't just be talking about polar bears and melting glaciers when the reason why we have a fossil fuel crisis is because oil companies are coming into our neighborhoods and they are drilling in our neighborhoods. And our country allows for this to happen, even though the people who are getting sick are Black and brown people. And so if we were to refuse to let them extract from our communities, we would not have a fossil fuel crisis. So the climate crisis is a consequence of white supremacy, of racism. And I was feeling like those stories were not out there, and I was not feeling inspired by the content that I did see. I feel like it reflected this kind of like far away thing. Like, you know, we have to pay attention to what's happening in the forest. And yes, of course we have to pay attention to the Amazon. Of course we have to pay attention to melting glaciers, but we have to also figure out how we landed here, and that the day-to-day climate crisis is created on the backs because of the exploitation in communities of color. So you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that there's actually a guilty party. You know, the majority of emissions are coming from the wealthiest people. They're not coming from us. So it was urgent to create content that talked about that, and that did it in a way where you don't have to know the science. You don't have to know the science. You just have to go. If you're in Los Angeles, you just got to go look at the freeways. You got to go see where they're looked at. You got to just type in your zip code into the California Enviro screen to see that people who live in Compton or East LA are getting sick. They have, the rates of pollution are so high that they're in the red zone, just like here in East Oakland. And then you look at Beverly Hills and voila, green zone. How did that happen? Like, how is it that these white communities have clean air and communities of color don't? And so we felt we needed to be able to have another way to talk about climate, and we created it. and we took risks with it. We allowed it to be a transmedia kind of organism, in the sense where we created visual art, we created t-shirts, signs that we could carry at the rally. You know, we talked to people on the street. Layel would ask, what does climate woke mean to you? And, you know, I think for artists, it's, if you feel that you want to see something manifested, just do it, just create it and allow for it to take the form it's going to take. It's not about coming with like a solid plan. Sometimes the work, the iteration of the work is what lets things evolve. That's what art is. It is the evolution of being iterative, of seeing, oh, you know, how does this land? How does it land when on Earth Day we commission Black, Indigenous, Latinx artists to take over a tradition that has been largely celebrated by white people, which is now changing, right? And so I urge you that, especially in the realm of climate, y'all, it is ridiculous how many white people center themselves in this space. And just like there's a racial reckoning moment happening in the country, there's a racial reckoning moment happening in the climate movement. And so if you care about environmentalism, if you care about animals, about our forests, about our oceans, we are in urgent, urgent, urgent need of stories. And I can assure you that Hollywood is going to be needing these stories as well, because from our research, we know that in 2019, there was only three fiction shows that mentioned climate, right? Big Little Lies being one of them. So the opportunities are vast. And, you know, I think the big takeaway is to take risks with your content, and knowing you don't have to start in a, you know, highly produced plan. You can allow for it to be emergent, as our friend Adrienne Marie Brown talks about, and take your idea to the streets. And I can assure you, you will get the response around understanding how sticky your idea can be.
Yep. And I appreciate that every time we create, we're always open to that pushback. And I want to go back to, if you care about trees or animals, like, you should engage in issues of climate change, specifically as Latinx creators. I feel like we tend to really easily get co-opted into how whiteness has shaped cultural and artistic productions. And so we easily try to like fit into that mold. And it's been through looking at how Black communities have overtly had to create their own since the beginning of this country that I think it's important for us as Latinx people to take their lead, and to also think about what are the stories of ours that we're constantly compromising in media that aren't being told the way that we want, that we need them to be told. And as a transgender, non-conforming person who's Indigenous descent, I've never seen anybody in the media with that kind of identity. So for me, as a performance artist as well, is I wanted to be in front of the camera. If I was going to talk about climate change, I wanted to be in front of the camera. If I was going to talk about just how I was navigating social relationships through a global pandemic that is predominantly impacting Latinx communities because of the service industries we fall into, I wanted to be in front of the camera. And I think that with Climate Woke, we have this value, which is we will not put anybody behind the camera that we're not willing to put them in front of the camera. And because we want to stay in our intersectional values, we hire an all POC team when we're shooting. We work with predominantly women of color, people who are experiencing gender oppression, and developing scripts, as well as in editing and producing. And I think that that's something that wouldn't have been possible had Favianna not founded a nonprofit that was willing to be so bold and to create new visions that was challenging the nonprofit sector as well as the arts sector. And I think as filmmakers, like now we're able to create in such a paradoxical way because of so many champions, Favianna being one of them, that I feel like being able to boldly speak and be the identities that we hold in front of the camera and while we're shaping stories is so important. And so coming back to the Amazon Prime video, which I believe you all will have access to, is that when we started this process, we knew that we couldn't just talk about Amazon as a culprit. We all knew that, but we wanted to get it firsthand. We knew that there was going to be a lot of stories coming out about the labor injustices in the Amazon industry. And what I thought was, I know what's happening in the factories, because it's the same thing that's been happening since the plantations. It's the same thing. I want to hear what's happening to the communities around the warehouses. So we focused it on air quality, and we got all the community leaders and the people who lived around the warehouses to talk about what the impact was and to talk about what solutions they would want to see. And so I think for me, as a privileged person who's able to create content that I already have an umbrella to create under, because we took that slow time to really create that cultural signifier, Favianna, that because we took that time, I was able to be like really narrow in on the scope and sit at tables with, as we're co-designing scripts with movement partners, and our production team was led by an artist, a woman of color. And so because of that focus, we were really able to have movement partners kind of on board on the front end. And the call to action was really led by community leaders, which was, we need to put pressure on our governments to start regulating corporations heavier. And we need to, as consumers, all like start purchasing from our local economies and supporting more mom and pop shops, because supporting Walmart, Target, and Amazon is not working. And, you know, as a performance artist, it had to be funny. I had to make it in a way that was digestible, because we can keep making documentaries about a bunch of stuff, and as powerful as they are, if people aren't enjoying it, and a lot of that is facilitated through arts, then it's not really gonna really sink in as hard as we can. So I had the opportunity of attending Climate Story Lab, which was predominantly white men, as we were rolling out climate woke content. And the biggest feedback I got from folks was, I love your personality. We want to see that more on screen. So we brought in as much comical relief into the videos, because we wanted folks to really feel and laugh their way through something that's painful. It's one of our resilient strategies as like Latinx people. And I wanted to bring that on screen too. If you all check out some other videos we have, one of my other favorite jokes is telling a native elder if she charged her vibrator when she installs the solar panels in her house. And that's the joke that sticks with people about the video, but the video sticks. So just, I'm glad that you brought all this up, Favi, because I feel like what we've been able to create has been radical. And I also feel like we haven't even begun to see what can be created in the next 3 to 4 years, because of how bold we're being able to push narratives, I think.
And just one thing I want to add is that the audacity of you putting yourself in front of the camera and getting tools to do that, right? I mean, I know that with our friend Julio Salgado, who's also part of this festival, Julio recognized that he also wanted to be in front of the camera, and he took acting lessons from a really amazing actress, Rain Valdez. And so I do think that if you want to be in front of the camera, the role that you want to take, really empower yourself to occupy that, because the systems that currently exist are not made for us to succeed. And we can create our narratives in the way that we see fit. You know, we can take risks on people that the white supremacists cultural machine won't take risks on, but they will take risks on young white men, as we see over and over again. And that's structural racism. And so I really, I think the ability to dream big and to say, well, what would it be like if I could be in front of the camera? How do I work on my comedy skills? I mean, Layel, I've seen you over the years just really develop your camera presence, but you don't develop it in the abstract. You can't develop it in the abstract. You actually have to do the work of doing it, putting your work out there and seeing how people respond and adapting to that. And that's the power that we have as media makers, is that now we have at our access many tools to be able to test out and see how our content can land. So I love that. Just, you know, as a takeaway is to be bold enough in your vision to be able to, you know, think differently about the talent and how you want to manifest your ideas.
Yeah. And then I think as another takeaway is like, don't be afraid to experiment, and know that experimentation will always start to show you who your fan base is, as small
That's
as it
right.
is, and just build up on that. And I think that I was very shy to experiment with comedy. I was very shy to, so I also took a master writing class, the one that was taught by Shonda Rhimes, because I wanted to understand just how to write characters and how to write actual dialogue. So I feel like invest in your growth, and
That's right.
feel free to take experiments. Like there is nothing wrong with, if you're committed to short form, stick with short form. If you're committed to Instagram Reels, stick with Instagram Reels. If you're committed to long form, stick with it. And there's always going to be a lot of people who are, as I think specifically as Latinx, as we have absorbed so much colonial rhetoric, that we're always so harsh on each other. And so if you don't get
That's
the
right.
support from your community, just know that you're not alone, and that there's so many other content creators like you who are trying their best to just continue to push certain narratives. And I think our story needs to be told as dynamic
right.
people. We're trans, we're queer, we're polyamorous, we're, you know, religious. Some of us aren't. We're subscribed to different experiences. Some of us are disabled. Some of us are, you know, a little bit more affluent than others. Some of us are poor. Some of us come from rough beginnings and experiences. And I think I haven't seen enough of that Latinx experience in the media.
Yeah.
I just keep seeing
No, I
us as
know.
like the servers, the nannies, the janitors, like,
Or
more.
honestly, there's just a one size kind of Latinx people that are very light skinned and traditionally beautiful in ways that just don't reflect the communities that I'm a part of and that you're a part of, Layel. And I think we have to understand that that's also an effect of white supremacy, is how it has shaped our definition of who is acceptable to see on screen. And just like, we're not seeing enough body types, we're not seeing enough of the gender spectrum, and we're not seeing the full range of the experience of being part of this region. I mean, I even think the word Latinx sometimes just falls short of really the expansiveness of who comes from this land base, from Turtle Island, right? Basically from Mexico down south and all the islands. And so we can define that, we can normalize that. That's what artists do, is that we introduce new ideas into the public zeitgeist, and we can use them enough that they become normalized. And I think that that's a big task that we have as Latinx people, is pushing ourselves to be very expansive and not falling into the tropes of how we've been represented, but also the tropes that white supremacy creates for us.
Yeah, I love that. So the more of us that are challenging the stories and creating with a more inclusive lens, is only going to make for a more bioculturally diverse storytelling.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think we're going to need that. I always tell folks, like, we're going to need more biocultural diversity in order for us to survive the climate crisis. So know that you're doing your part by sharing more and more stories, because they need to be heard. Yeah. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Favi, about the
Thank you,
Germ Pod
Layel.
and Climate Woke. Yeah.
Yes, I hope everyone enjoys our work. You can catch more of our work on the Culture Strike feed on Instagram. Culture Strike is what we use. Our name is the Center for Cultural Power, but you can find us as Cultural Strike on YouTube, on IG, and then follow our individual accounts as well, because we are always producing content. I mean, I feel like as an artist, I consider myself an interdisciplinary artist. And when I make a video, even if it's about, you know, defunding the police and funding the arts, I will spend hours on it. I'll write my script. I'll, you know, figure out how I'm going to look. I'll make signs. I'll make my set design, because I want people to be inspired by the beauty of things. And so be sure to follow us. And thank you so much. And thank you to Lalif.
Yeah, thank you, Lalif.